Good afternoon, everyone. Good early evening, whatever time it may be. I know for some of you, you won't listen to this live. So for some of you, it will be morning, late at night, whatever time, wherever, however you may be listening. Welcome. It is right now, I'm live on the air. It is Friday, August the 21st, 2020. It's currently 4:24 p.m. Central Time. And this is going to be kind of a joint broadcast for two podcasts. This episode will go to the Currently On podcast, where I talk about music, movies, TV shows. If it's currently on, I talk about it. And this episode is live on the air right now for the Theology Central podcast, because we have a situation where something that's currently on, well, it has a lot to do with theology. So we're going to bring the two worlds together. I'm going to do one live broadcast. It will go to both podcasts. Theology Central, currently on. Theology Central, currently on. You should be subscribing to both. You really should. Now, currently on is more of a secular podcast. I deal with movies. I don't look at it from a theological perspective. I just talk about what's on, talk about the movies, give my thoughts, give my opinions. Sometimes I always dig into meaning, obviously, and I talk a lot about music. So just so that you know that, if you listen to Theology Central and you've never listened to Currently On, if you are a Currently On listener and you have no idea that I'm even the host of Theology Central is obviously a podcast all about theology, looking at the world from a theological perspective. So this is going to be interesting, speaking to two very different audiences. Hopefully, I'm going to provide you some very interesting insight and give you a lot to think about. And we have a lot to cover in this episode. Now, let me just say this. I'm going to try to make this as short as possible. I may discover that I need to do a part 2 here. I'm going to be very interested in the reaction to this. I think most likely I may make Christians more mad at me than I make the people who listen to the secular podcast. The secular podcast listeners may decide that they don't even care about this subject. So I don't know. The reaction to this may be interesting, but I have a lot to say, a lot to talk about. And so let's just get right to it. Are you ready? So this is a episode for the Theology Central podcast. This is an episode for the Currently On podcast, so that you understand what's going on. I had to waste the time to explain all of that. So I just want to make sure everyone understands what's happening. All right, here we go. It's Friday. And if you know me, you know what Friday means for me. It actually begins on Thursday night at 11 p.m. Central Time, because I live in the Central Time Zone. At 11 p.m. Central Time, on all the music streaming services, guess what happens? All of the new music drops, because Friday is New Music Day. And as a lifelong music fan, when I say a music fan, I don't say that in a light way. I don't say that lightly, okay? You have to understand, when I talk about me being a music fan, music is an absolutely central part of my life. I spend hours listening to it. I can't even tell you how much of my life has been spent listening to music, buying music, going to concerts, talking about music, reading music, researching music, debating about music. Just so much of my life has really been about music. So I always get excited for New Music Day, because it's so awesome to live in a time where all I have to do for New Music Day is put on a pair of headphones or turn on my stereo equipment and just hit play, and I can listen to every album that is released on any given Friday. Because of streaming services, I can just listen to anything. There was a day that all I could do was go to the music store on Fridays, it wasn't Friday back then. New Music Day wasn't on Friday back then. Okay, but on New Music Day, I could go to the record store, wait for them to open, okay, on Friday morning, or whatever morning it was. I think it was Tuesday. I can't remember what day New Music Day was back then. Okay, but whatever New Music Day was on, all I could do is wait at the record store, wait for them to open. I could go in, I could look at all the new releases and go, oh, that looks interesting, that looks interesting, that looks interesting. But guess what? I had a limited amount of money, so I could only buy a few albums each week. And I was so dedicated to buying as many as I could. What I would do, I did this throughout my childhood. The money I was given for my lunches at school, I would not spend my money for lunches at school. I would keep that money, would not eat. I went without food. I don't think I ate lunch my entire school career. I saved the money, and I used the money then to go to the record store. As soon as New Music Day occurred, I would save up a week's worth of lunch money. Sometimes I had to wait, 2 weeks. I can't remember how much it was, but I saved up, and then I would go and purchase whatever I could. And any other way I could earn money, I would go and buy as many albums as I could. And I had a system. First, I would buy those albums that were well-known, that I knew were coming out, that everyone was looking forward to, the more popular mainstream stuff. And then I would always make sure one of my purchases was some album that I'd never heard of by some individual I'd never seen. I would just look and go, okay, that looks interesting, and buy it. And sometimes I discovered what I felt like was hidden treasures that opened up a new world to me. And at other times I would be like, what was that garbage? I just wasted my money. No, I never felt like I wasted my money because I was exploring the world of music. So whether I loved it or whether I hated it, it was still music, and I was exploring it, and I got to learn about different styles, different genres, different forms of songwriting, different forms of production. I got to learn about so much by just sitting there listening to these albums. So music has been a major part of my life. The great thing about now is I'm not limited. I can just open up the list and go, listen. I usually stay up all night, listen to everything I can possibly listen to, choose my favorites from that list and say, okay, and then those favorites I try to listen to at a minimum of 10 times. And then after I've listened to those 10 times, then I start looking at those that did not make my favorite list. And then I start working through those, trying to listen to those 10 times and try to listen to everything that I can 10 times before the next Friday and more new music is released. So it's an amazing thing. And it gives you that opportunity to explore. And I'm really stressing that because I have an album here in front of me that was released last night at 11 p.m. Central Time. It's one of the albums that showed up on all of my streaming services on my list of albums. And I was like, okay, I need to listen to this. For some of you, it would be an album you would never even bother to listen to. It's by an artist who comes from a certain world of music that you may not be interested in and you may not care. Others of you, especially those within the Christian world and the Christian community, I'm assuming you're going to know the name. I don't know how you wouldn't know the name. And you probably know some of the music that this artist has put out. So if you're one of those people who are like, well, I don't care about this. Well, you still have the ability to go listen. It doesn't cost you any extra because you're already paying your monthly subscription fee to whatever music streaming service you're using. So explore. Dive in, expand your horizons. So at 11 p.m., headphones on, new music drops. I'm looking, and I'm like, oh, I knew this was coming. I'd forgotten. I was looking to see if Drake was going to drop his new album because we know it's on its way. And I was thinking maybe he would do so. I think he's going to wait, obviously, to next week. But I thought this would be a perfect time for him to drop it. He didn't have any there wasn't any really major competition. Well, we could, next week is Katy Perry. I guess it depends on where you look for your competition. But I thought Drake would possibly drop his album, but it wasn't Drake. Nope. But it was in the realm of hip hop and rap. It was the artist known as Lecrae. Now, if you know anything about Lecrae, you know he has been a huge name, a big name, very influential in the Christian hip-hop rap world. Now, some of you may not even know the Christian hip-hop rap world exists, but it does. And at one point, it really reached a major level of influence, of popularity. The albums were getting a lot of attention. They were even getting mainstream attention. And Christian hip-hop really looked like it was going to take off. And then it's kind of faded and it's kind of lost that influence. And it's not what it was, at least in my estimation, in my opinion. It's kind of lost that. We could talk about that for a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons may have added to that, but we won't get into all of that. But whenever Lecrae releases an album, he's still a huge name. He still has, he gets, I just saw on NPR, NPR was talking about the new Lecrae album. I mean, there you go. Typically, a Christian album is not going to get talked about on NPR. They're talking about the new Lecrae album. So his name is big enough that when he drops an album, he gets put right there on the front page of many streaming services. A lot of Christian albums, you're never even going to know they're released unless you're looking for them. So big name, still gets lots of attention. So he dropped an album, and I was like, well, I've got to listen to it. I've got to listen to it, and I've got to talk about it. But here's the thing. Whenever I get ready to dive into a Christian album, and whenever I try to offer any thoughts or any kind of review, it always brings up so many issues because it's very difficult to talk about a Christian album, and especially someone like Lecrae, where there's all kinds of reactions to his albums, and there's been, in many cases, a kind of a backlash against him within the Christian world. It's hard to talk about a Christian album, especially an album by Lecrae, without dealing with all of these issues. So here's what we're going to do. Lecrae released a new album. The name of the album is called Restoration. All right. Lecrae, he released a new album, Restoration. It has 14 tracks, and the album is 41 minutes long. All right. 14 tracks, 41 minutes long, Restoration by Lecrae. But before we can really dig in, we need to step back. We need to add a broader context, and we're really going to look at some very important things, and I hope you will listen to me carefully here, especially those in the Christian world, but those not in the Christian world. This may give you some kind of this may give you an insight into a world that maybe you're not familiar with. Maybe you don't really understand this, but if you want to understand maybe a Lecrae album and how some people will react to it, I think this information I'm going to give you is going to be very important. So are you ready? Let's dig in. Let's start by going way back. Let's go back to the 1980s, all right? To the 1980s. Now, I became a Christian in the 1980s, and so I was right there. I was literally right there for the birth of Christian hip-hop and Christian rap. Now, I was already listening to rap. I was already listening to what we now refer to as hip hop, rap, hip hop. I was there. I could go all the way back. Grandmaster Flash, Run DMC, Sugar Hill Gang. I could go Rapture by Blondie. I could talk about all of my how early on that I was listening to this and following this new genre, this new music. But once I became a Christian, obviously, okay, where rap, hip hop, then it became this battle. Do you listen to secular music? Do you not listen to secular music? Do you only listen to Christian music? And we could get into a whole lengthy discussion there. But I became a Christian. And I became a Christian, and obviously, and some people don't get this, when you become a Christian, you kind of hope for, and especially if you love music, maybe there's some music out there that will speak about the experience and life experience that one has as a Christian. Because now that you've become a Christian, you're trying to follow the scriptures. Your life is supposed to be centered around scripture, following God, serving God, and you're trying to live this life, and your life is being lived with this whole now Christian worldview that you're trying to see the world through. And so you want music that really speaks to trying to live this life out, trying to live this Christian life out. You want music out there that captures it, speaks to it, that you can relate to, because it's relating stories and ideas and thoughts that you can relate to as a Christian. It's talking about your struggles. It's talking about, your faith. It's promoting your faith. It's uplifting your faith. It's defending your faith. It's really just talking about the things that you think about as a Christian. So that's why there are so many different forms of Christian music, because there are Christians out there who took different genres of music and then wanted to reflect Christian ideas in those genres of music. All right. Sometimes the world's like, well, why Christian rock, Christian rap? That's stupid. That doesn't make any sense. Why? As a Christian, I love different genres of music. And if now that I'm a Christian, I want music that can speak to the experience of living as a Christian. That makes sense, right? It makes sense. And you think, okay, when I became a Christian in the 80s, and I was part of the reason I became a Christian is through Christian music, through Christian rock, through a band named Petra. It was a lot of as a music fan, I discovered that there's this music out there called Christian music. I didn't know a lot about it, but I knew, this is music. I didn't care if it was Christian. I didn't care what it was. It was music, and I didn't know a lot about it, so I started listening. Found out this band was coming to Abilene, Texas, named Petra. I went and saw them, and the lyrics and everything just kind of one thing flowed into another that ultimately led to me becoming a Christian. So Christian music was very critical in it because it was exposing me to these Christian thoughts and these Christian ideas that I wasn't completely familiar with. And there was a call to faith. I need to believe in Christ, this idea about salvation. So Christian music played a very major part in me becoming a Christian. And obviously after I became a Christian, then I jumped in with both feet. Oh, here's this whole world of Christian music. Let me dig in. Let me explore it. Let me see what this is all about. And at the same time, I had this massive pressure placed upon me that I wasn't supposed to, as a Christian, you can no longer listen to secular music, all right? So I was kind of forced into the Christian music world even more so. I would go to their concerts, listen to their music, et cetera, et cetera. And because I'm such a big-time music fan, well, then guess what? I started digging in, and I wanted to know everything going on in the Christian music world. I wanted to know every genre. I wanted to know every artist. I wanted to know every studio. I wanted to know every record label. I wanted to know every producer. I wanted to know, and I started hearing this talk that it was just starting to come out, Christian rap, Christian hip-hop, right? And this takes us back to I think it was the first commercially released album. In fact, it's interesting. The first commercially released album that was distributed, quote unquote, the first commercially released Christian rap, Christian hip hop album was actually released under a secular label, not a Christian label. That is kind of interesting. And it was the name of the album was The Gospel Beat Jesus Christ, 1982, all right, which was actually prior to my conversion. But obviously you have to understand how this works at this time. Obviously Christian hip hop, and this was even released on a secular label. This album obviously was not very known. And when I first became a Christian and started looking into this, I didn't even realize this album even existed at the time. But it was McSweet, The Gospel Beat, Jesus Christ, released in 1982. And that was on Polygram Records. If you know music, you know Polygram Records. There was a lot of famous albums released on Polygram Records. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. The Gospel Beat, Jesus Christ, The Gospel Beat, Jesus Christ, 1982, McSweet, all right? So I started hearing a little bit about this album. I don't even know if I was able to find a copy of it early on. I think maybe I asked people at because basically to get Christian music, you went to a Christian bookstore to try to buy music. And I don't even know if I ever was able to find a copy. I may have found a copy later on. The one that I definitely remember came about in 1985, and it was called Bible Break by Stephen Wiley. Stephen Wiley, Bible Break. I think I still have a copy of that somewhere in my bazillions of CDs and boxes of CDs. I think I still have it, all right? Bible Break, but please hear the title. The first one, The Gospel Beat, Jesus Christ. Bible Break, Stephen Wiley. You can see these albums are very explicit in its Christian message, giving you a very clear idea what these albums are about. They're going to take rap and they're going to take this idea of rap, this genre of music, and use it to speak about things clearly Christian. They're going to proclaim a very biblical Christian message. Right? I think we can all see that. Then in the same year, JC and the Boys was founded, and then it begins to be slow, but then this genre really begins to build. And I'll just name if you know anything about the history of this genre, you'll know all of these names. Michael Peace. Saw him in concert, met him, had most of his albums. Dynamic Twins, I had most of their albums. T-Bone, very, very influential in the whole world. And then the one that really became an early commercial success, and I think this is the one I definitely remember buying at the Bible bookstore on Butternut Street in Abilene, Texas. PID, Preachers in Disguise. PID, Preachers in Disguise. That was a instrumental album. This is the one that really this is the one I remember it actually showed up in the Christian bookstore, right? Rap, a rap album in a Christian bookstore. You can't understand it in 2020. In 1985, this was a big deal. And there were people who, when they found out that there was a rap music in the Christian bookstore, there was a very harsh reaction against it. There was a harsh reaction against it, and people said that's devil music, that beat comes from, demonic worship. And man, there was a major backlash against it. I remember, Preachers in Disguise, and they were like, no, they're false preachers in disguise. Oh, I remember all of the controversy. Man, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And at the same time, Christian rock was facing its own criticism, and there was a lot of backlash to all of this. I remember even prior to my conversion, I was at a church, and there was a person standing in front of the church, and he had like a whiteboard, and he had some lyrics written down, and he had a cassette, like a boombox, and he played a song everybody in the church was to look at the lyrics, and then he basically was like, "Is that Christian?" And it was some new Christian song, and he was condemning it. So there was backlash against this kind of explosion, the beginning of really what was going to become this major industry known as the contemporary Christian music industry. But I was right there in the middle of all of this. I was buying Preachers in Disguise. I was buying Michael Peace. I was buying Stephen Wiley. I was buying these albums, all right? And then we know somewhere in I think maybe it was 87, 88, 89. Maybe it was 1989. We all know what happened. You had to, if you were a Christian at the time. Heaven Bound. Heaven Bound by DC Talk. Yeah, some may say one of the worst songs ever written. But okay, DC Talk emerges. Oh, and DC Talk is going to be very instrumental, really, in exploding the doors. They break the dam down and really bring in and almost make Christian hip hop more acceptable. Now, we could argue why. Maybe because it was a white kid rapping. Maybe there was a racial issue to it. Some will say yes, some will say no. But it was just like Elvis Presley it was taking music from black artists and now making it acceptable because he was white, singing it, and a white audience embraced it. But it was black artists. He was taking their music. Same thing happened with the early stages of rock and roll. Now it kind of happened here in the Christian world. It was a white kid, Toby Mac, rapping. He's the one, and then he kind of made it more acceptable. Next thing you know, all of these white kids walking around wearing DC Talk shirts, and next thing you know, Christian rap really started exploding, and you definitely saw kind of a major move in the 1990s, and a lot of times on Saturday nights, some Christian radio stations would even dare play some of it. And in Oklahoma, there were some Christian radio stations, I think it was Saturday mornings, maybe sometimes Saturday nights, they would play actual Christian rap and hip hop, which was, again, you're like, what's the big deal? It was a big deal because this music was seen as an outsider coming into Christianity, and it created lots of controversy, and it was a big deal. And I could go through here and name artist after artist. I've got a lot of names written down here. We have ETW, End Time Warriors. I saw them in Omaha, Nebraska. ETW, I think I saw them in Omaha, Nebraska like 2 or 3 times. SFC, Soldiers for Christ, I saw them somewhere in Nebraska. I don't know where I saw. They were somewhere, maybe in Iowa, I don't know. DOC, Disciples of Christ, Gospel Gangstas. They were super big coming out of South Central. They got a lot of attention. Then you had people like obviously T-Bone, JC Crew, Dynamic Twins, Freedom of Soul, Idol King, Apocalypse, 12th Tribe, Holy Alliance. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I have stacks of these CDs to this day. And so I was right there at the beginning of all of this, right there in the middle of it, buying it, supporting it, defending it. And trust me, I got into major conflicts, and it caused me, look, my defense of a lot of this Christian music actually put me at odds with Christians, and it caused me major problems. I won't even get into all the issues. I got into major issues. I got thrown out of a Bible institute. I mean, it was nothing but controversy because I was defending, well, a lot of the contemporary Christian music at the time, because I was like, these people are trying to sing about God and Jesus, but no, the music style is wrong. So I could tell you all day about the history. Now, all of that early history brings us into the 2000s, and the 2000s really saw an explosion of the Christian rap hip hop world, an explosion of artists that became very well known, and we could talk all about them. And Lecrae was right at the forefront, and some called this the explosion of a lot of the Christian hip hop coincided with the explosion of Reformed theology, and a lot of these Christian rappers promoted and sung and rapped Reformed theology, which really put them in an interesting perspective because they're bringing this system of theology known as Reformed theology, bringing it to a lot of young people. Now, sometimes I don't know if the young people got it, but it was right there. And you listen to some of their lyrics and you go, wow, they're dealing with major theological issues. It was very Bible-based, very theological, very in your face. There was no apology. It was straightforward. It was very Christian, and it was right there. And it really kind of just exploded. And then, well, different things happened. Different things changed. And it began kind of lose its. It feels like the scene, wherever it was, they weren't able to maintain that momentum, and it seemed like they lost it. And you could argue that part of the problem was, now listen to me carefully, is that many of the artists really changed what they were beginning to rap about. They began to change how they presented their message. They began to change their focus. And as a result, many in the Christian world became disillusioned with them, frustrated with them, and stopped listening to them. All right? And they kind of turned their back on them. And Lecrae in the new album even mentions this people turning their back on him. He even mentions this because I think, and there's no way to deny there's a truth to it, but we're going to get into why. So Lecrae was right there at this explosion in the 2000s. He was right there with it. He was kind of the leader of it. He started his own record label, independent record label. Right there, he promoted. Concerts. Lecrae was there, and everyone wanted to be around Lecrae and attached to Lecrae because you knew that could really get you a lot of recognition and really possibly, take your musical career and get it going off on the right track. So that kind of gets us to where we end up today, all right? Because today we have a new album by Lecrae. And I want you to just see a couple of things from that history. It started off, it was controversial. Again, I think it was a white kid rapping, Toby McKeon from Toby Mac, we refer to him that way. Toby Mac from DC Talk, this white kid rapping that really kind of broke the door down and kind of made it more acceptable, all right? And we could talk about, why it worked that way. But again, the same thing happened with Elvis Presley in the birth of rock and roll. And, that we can get into the whole history of racism. And I hate that that's the way it works. Who cares the color of the person? Who cares, where music originates, from which culture? Who cares? It's music. Love it, appreciate it. I don't get all of that, but that's a whole different discussion. So bottom line is, it started off, And I want to make sure I stress this. It's original, it started off with a very explicit Christian message. In many cases, it could be argued Christian rappers were willing to say things in a far more bold and blunt way than other forms of Christian music would. It was the Christian rappers who would talk about false doctrines and false teachers, and they would name names, and they would be blunt when they talked about sin and hell and judgment. I mean, blunt and bold, sometimes way more so than what you would hear in the normal average Christian radio station, where it was very almost, there was almost like a generic way. It was very watered down at times. But man, within the Christian rap world, there was no watering it down. They were going to put Jesus at the forefront, and they were going to smack you in the face with the message, and they didn't care if you were offended or not. And I want to make it very clear. That is what many in the audience wanted. They wanted this bold proclamation. And then when that started, it felt like many began to change that kind of presentation. That's when many were like, no, they sold out, done, not listening to them anymore. I'm done supporting it. And then they walked away. And then, ultimately, the movement begins to lose it. Because listen, the average person in the world are not going to be looking to see what Christian artists are singing about what and how they're singing it. Many in the world don't care about buying a Christian rap album. They're going to buy the secular rap album. So if the Christians aren't going to support them, well, unless those people can change their whole focus and reintroduce themselves to the secular world, they're going to be at a great disadvantage, and they're going to be hurt. They're going to be hurt in a very dramatic way. Now, just keep that all in mind, because it's all getting ready to come together. So that brings us today. Lecrae releases the album Restoration. And Lecrae has been a part of a lot of this kind of controversy and pushback, because some people have gotten very upset believing he stopped being explicit in a gospel presentation, and instead of being theological, he became more of a social gospel than a biblical or theological gospel. He got more concerned with social issues than biblical and theological issues, that his focus wasn't on God, his focus was on things in the world, and people kind of turned on him. Now, keep that in mind, because that brings us to what I believe are some of the major issues in the Christian music world. All right? I believe this brings right to the forefront some of the major issues. So it all starts with Lecrae. He releases an album. We went back and saw the history. All right? Just a brief summary of the history. I spent years studying the history of contemporary Christian music, researching it, listening to everything. I could go into far more detail. I could spend hours and hours talking about it, especially my journey through the Christian hip-hop world, all the albums I bought, all the concerts I attended, a lot of interesting things. I could give you stories, but I just want you to get the basic idea. Please note, it was explicit. It was controversial. It was explicit. A white kid rapping, Toby Mac, was really the one that kind of broke the door down. It started having kind of a major influence in the 90s, really exploded in the 2000s, and then began to kind of lose its influence and power and its popularity in a lot of ways. All right. And again, we could talk about how culture is changing, and we could argue that we're kind of living more and more in a post-Christian world, and more people are moving away from Christianity. And if they're going to move away from Christianity, then they don't care what they used to listen to when, as far as Christian music is concerned. They're just going to move over to the more secular-minded rappers. So again, you can keep that in mind. Now, we could talk about the influence of Christianity in many secular rappers. All right, that could be an interesting discussion, but keeping it over here in the Christian world. Now, all of this brings us to some issues with the Christian music world in general, and these completely relate to then what do we do with the new Lecrae album, right? This is all going to make sense. Here are some of the issues with the Christian music world. Number one, an identity crisis. The first issue in the Christian music world is an identity crisis. And here is the problem. When a Christian artist starts out, Are they trying to be a preacher? Are they trying to be a minister? Do they view what they're doing as a form of ministry? That they're there to proclaim the scriptures? They're there to call people to faith and try to bring people to Christianity? Are they there to try to disciple people? Or do they see what they're doing as ministry, right? Biblical ministry. Evangelism or discipleship. Evangelism is trying to bring people to Christianity, to convert them, or to disciple them. They're trying to bring a Christian message, speak of Christian issues, biblical issues, doctrinal issues, theological issues, in order to disciple Christians, to help them live and walk a better Christian life. All right? Is that their identity? Or is their identity no, I'm just a musician who loves music and want to make music. I just happen to be a Christian, and at times my Christianity may be explicitly seen in a song, and at other times it may not be seen at all. Sometimes I want to talk about a broken relationship that I experienced when my girlfriend broke up with me. Sometimes I may want to talk about how much I love my wife or how much I loved a girl. I may want to talk about anything, and I may not be explicit in my Christian message. So which is it? Are you coming out saying, I'm a preacher, I'm a minister, that's the way I'm going? Or are you out there just saying, hey, I'm a musician and sometimes I'm going to talk about God? There is this identity crisis that happens in the Christian music industry. And sometimes you don't, as the consumer, you don't really know. Sometimes you're like, well, I don't know what they're trying to be. I don't know. Now, sometimes this will lead to problem number 2. All right. So let's just keep it with problem number 1. All right. So there's problem number 1, identity crisis. Preachers, ministers are simply musicians who are Christians, and at times they will reflect it. It will reflect in their music in an explicit way, and other times you may not even know it or see it. Other than, sometimes you may not even know it or see it. Now, some Christians out there believe every Christian musician must be a preacher, a minister, and they must be calling people to repentance. They must preach in their music. They must be explicit. They must be bold. They must say Jesus 65 times per every song. And if they don't, they're sellouts, they're compromisers, they're false teachers, and we're not going to listen to them. Right? This puts the artist in a very interesting perspective, right? Some are like, no, those other people, get them out of the Christian music industry. We don't want them in the Christian. They can go make secular records. All right. So, but the artist really, sometimes the art, and now on one hand, we'll get to that in a minute. So just stay right here. Let's just leave it right here. There's this identity crisis. Which are you? What do you want to be? And I think sometimes the artist, they don't really know what they want to be, right? I think sometimes they start off wanting to be one thing and then later change their mind, but now the expectations of the audience are going to get in the way, and we'll see that in a minute. So there's number 1, there's an identity crisis. And if you've listened to Christian music for any length of time, you are aware of how this happens. All right, you get the idea that this artist wants to be this, and then an album comes out and you're like, well, wait a minute. This is not the same. It's not the same person. It's not the same person. And let me tell you, Lecrae is a good example of this. If you listen to Lecrae's first couple of albums and you listen to his later albums, you're going to be like, what happened to Lecrae? Well, what happened to Lecrae of Real Talk? What happened to Lecrae of Rebel? Where is that Lecrae? So again, the people looking are like, where's the real Lecrae? What happened? And so there's this identity crisis. And other artists don't face this. Other artists can just sing about, look, in the secular world, you can sing about whatever you want. Right? You don't really get pinned down. You don't, like, your mission is just to make music. You don't really have a mission beyond that. You can have other things other endeavors that you're interested in, and you can promote. Maybe you're very political in a song. Maybe you're not political in a song. But that's really, your identity just becomes your music. Now, now your identity may be attached to a genre of music. And if you change that genre dramatically, now that may create some problems in the secular world. But your identity is not attached to necessarily a worldview, a purpose in your music that you're trying to accomplish something. Christian artists really find themselves dealing with this. And here is the reason why. So number 1, identity crisis. Number 2, this is important. The methods. This is where it gets interesting. The methods. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're a Christian artist and you're going to be assigned to a Christian record label, and you're going to somehow try to make it in the Christian music world, guess what method you're going to use to get out there? You're going to play concerts inside churches. You're going to go to youth rallies. You're going to go to youth conferences. You're going to go to big conferences. You're going to be looking to the Christian world to promote you. You're going to be looking to the Christian world to support you. You're going to be looking to the church to book you for a concert inside that church. You're going to want Christian radio to promote you. You're going to want Christian publications. You're going to want Christian speakers to mention you. You need the Christian world to support you, promote you, and allow you to play your music to them. Well, guess what? If you're going inside the churches, going to the Christian youth rallies, going to all of these Christian big events, then guess what you're going to be viewed as? Yeah, that's right. You're going to be viewed as a preacher. You're going to be viewed as a minister. That's exactly what you're going to be looked at. And so what many Christians do, this is very important, they start off knowing they need all of these Christian things to really promote them. And so in many cases, the very early albums, they come out really hard. Jesus this, Bible verse this, theology this, Jesus, Christianity, sin, devil, hell, heaven, repent, salvation, Jesus dying on the cross, Jesus, 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 Jesus. They go hard with that because they need that Christian world to build them up and support them. That's how they're going to make their money. That's how they're going to get on the charts. That's how they're going to sell their records. That's how they're going to sell out their concerts. They need it. And then they reach a certain level of success. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. Then they're like, you know what? I'm going to try to play concerts without the church. I'm going to try to play them in an arena. I'm not going to go to a church. I'm not going to go to the youth rally concerts. And this is what they always say. I'm tired of preaching to the choir. Now they decide they don't really want to be the pastor, preacher, all Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. They want to do different kinds of albums and sing about different kinds of things. Well, guess what? This creates the problem. It creates this identity crisis. Well, who are you? And then it's like, wait a minute. So you use these methods to get to a certain level, then you abandon those methods for new methods. And guess what it feels like to the Christians who were there with you from the beginning? It feels like you turned your back on them. So guess what they do in return? They turn their back on you. This is a complicated mess the Christian music industry gets itself into. And there's no real easy way around it. Now, here's the thing. And this is where I get really frustrated with the musicians. Look, man, if you didn't want all the stuff that comes with being a Christian musician, you didn't want to have to sing about Jesus. You didn't want to have to live a certain lifestyle. You couldn't use certain language in your albums. If you didn't want all of that, then why were you more than happy to go along with using all of those things to get yourself promoted and get yourself big? Like, why? You can't whine about it later. Later, you can't go, all the Christians turned their back on me and all those Christians were so mean to me. You used them. You gave them the idea that you're here, you're a ministry, you're here to get people saved, you're here for Christianity. And then when you decide you're done with all of that, then you whine about it. Oh, they had all these expectations on me and they wanted this and they wanted that. Well, that's because that's the way you sold yourself. That was the identity you identified with. You identified as being that. The method you used everything in Christianity to get popular. And then you can't later go, well, peace out. I don't want that. I want my next album to be, I'm going to talk about whatever I want. You can't have it both ways. I've stated it before. If you're just a musician and you just want to sing about whatever you want, stay out of the Christian music industry. Stay out of it. If you don't want to get caught up in that Christian machine where you're going from church to church, youth group to youth group, youth rally, youth conference, you're on stage and they're expecting you to talk about Jesus and quote a Bible verse and they want your songs to be singing about Jesus. If you don't want all of that, stay a million miles away from the Christian music industry. Go make it in the secular industry. Now, sometimes you can be a big fish in the small pond of the Christian music world. But when you go over there in the secular world, you may turn out to be an insignificant, invisible fish in a giant ocean. And so some people want to be the big fish in the small pond. So they use the Christian machine to get them. And this creates a problem. There's an identity crisis, and then it becomes a conflict of methods. What you've got to determine what you are. You've got to determine. And I think many of the Christian artists don't realize what they get themselves into. And this creates all the problems, right? This leads to a third thing. So we've got an identity crisis. You got to figure out what you are, a preacher, a minister, or just simply a musician. You got to figure out your methods. Are you going to play in churches and youth conferences and you're going to do all of that? Or are you just going to forget all of that and play in bars and clubs and arenas and little small venues, and you're just going to promote yourself that way? Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to work this? You got to make it determined. I remember the Christian band Guardian. I remember seeing them in concert. Guess what? I didn't go to a church. I went to the Ranch Bowl in Omaha, Nebraska, where I also saw all kinds of punk bands, Social Distortion, and some amazing shows. At the Ranch Bowl, I would go there for a lot of secular concerts, and this was not a Christian venue in any way, shape, or form. Trust me, it wasn't a Christian venue. And here was a Christian band playing in this non-Christian environment. That I respected that. They were there competing with they didn't go to a church. That's not where they were trying to go. That's not the way they were trying to promote themselves. And I think that was cool. But some of the bands, man, they want to play the church. They want to play all of that, but then they don't really want to do the Christian album. They don't really want to sing about Jesus. They don't really want to talk about that. They want to talk about other issues. And then the Christian world's like, well, wait a minute, what happened? Keep that in mind. All right? Now, this brings us to the third issue in the Christian music world. So the first is an identity crisis. Second are the methods. Third, the evolution. Now, for a musician, here's the thing. You can evolve as a musician, and maybe the things you sang about in the past don't resonate with you. Maybe the way you sang about those things in the past, they don't resonate with you 5 years, 7 years, 10 years later. Maybe you evolve as an artist and you want to change and you want to sing about different things and talk about different things and sing about different things and maybe ask some tough questions and express doubt and you don't really want to just preach a sermon. Well, guess what happens? The Christian music world, this is the sad part about Christians. They won't allow that. Christians will turn on you in 3.2 seconds. They're going to say, no. We want the sermon. We want Jesus mentioned. I remember listening to somebody going, you know how you determine the quality of a Christian album? You count how many times they say Jesus. And I was like, really? That's how we determine musical quality within Christianity? We can get into a whole issue there. That's why I think a lot of Christian music is nothing more than second-rate musical hacks who would never make it in the secular world because they're garbage. Okay, but that's a whole different discussion here. But this is what happens. The artist evolves. Now, here's the thing. You have the ability to evolve if you didn't get caught up in the Christian music machine. If you get caught up in the Christian music machine, you started off as a preacher, you started off as a minister, and that's the way you're going to have to go out. And if you want to evolve and get away from that, people are going to turn on you. People are going to like, they started talking about social issues and they didn't really preach Jesus and they didn't really talk about the Bible. I'm not going to listen to them anymore. I'm done listening to them because you can't, no evolving as an artist. No, you can't express different. No. They want the same biblical message. That's why if you're going to go in that way, you got to go out that way. And the evolution usually creates a problem. And guess where the musical artist ends up? In kind of no man's land. They're kind of in no man's land. Their Christian audience abandons them, and the world is not going to come running to them, so they're in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's what happens. And it happens over and over with artists. They evolve and they decide, I don't want to really, because in many of them, they had no desire to be a preacher. Many of them had no desire to be a minister. Their Christian faith was important to them, but they didn't really, they wanted to make music. They didn't necessarily, now, to be fair, there are some artists who wanted to be that way. And they start that way and they end that way. And congratulations. But some of the other artists never really wanted that. But guess what? They made the mistake of putting themselves in that machine and in that kind of, here's the way we do things. And then they realize later they didn't want to be a part of that. And then you end up in all kinds of problems. You end up with all kinds of problems. And you've got, and again, the Christian music world, they don't allow for a lot of evolution. They don't. They may reject scientific evolution as far as life, how life came to be and how human beings came to be. Christianity may reject that, but they also seem to reject a lot of evolution when it comes to music, musicians, and songwriting, and what they want to sing about, what they want to talk about. They want you to preach a sermon in many cases. And the ones who don't really care if you preach a sermon, the ones who don't really care for that, many of them listen to secular music anyway, so that they may not even be paying attention to what's happening in the Christian music world anyway. So you end up in this weird world. You've got to determine who you want your audience to be. All right? Just keep this in mind. This all applies to the Lecrae album. All right. And then, so number one, you got the identity crisis. Number two, you have the methods. This kind of, which method are you going to use? You have this evolution that can happen in an artist, which can put you in conflict. And then you get the expectations. The number four, the expectations. Christians who buy and listen to music and go to concerts, they have an expectation. They have a certain way they think it should work. And if you don't do it that way, they will turn on you. They will say you abandoned the faith. You turned your back on the faith, because many of them are not worried about the musical quality in the album. They're worried about how many times you say Jesus and how boldly you proclaim it. And so this creates this weird world, this really broken world in the Christian music world. And I have seen it played out over and over and over again. And you're like, what is happening? I remember, Amy Grant, early Amy Grant. I mean, here's this little young girl singing all these kind of praise songs about Jesus. I remember going to an Amy Grant concert, and there on the chairs for the concert was, the Gospel of John. They gave us a handouts of the Gospel of John, very Christian focused. And then the next thing you know, she's going in a kind of completely different direction, kind of releasing kind of a secular album, talking about our baby, and you're like, well, what's going on? Talking about love, talking about relationships. And it wasn't little praise songs and Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And I remember a lot of people going, whoa, what happened to Amy Grant? What happened to her? She's abandoned Christianity. She turned her faith. This is not Christian music. And then Christian radio is like, do we play it? Do we not play it? And I could go back and give you the history of Amy Grant and when the album that kind of really started calling into question a lot of this. You go back to early Amy Grant, later Amy Grant issues. Same thing with Michael W. Smith. Early Michael W. Smith, he was going to be the next Keith Green, right? And very famous in the history of Christian music. And then later on, it's kind of like, well, he's kind of going in a different direction. And then he kind of came back. So he was kind of able, he kind of navigated it a little bit where he tried to kind of go in that kind of secular direction. And then he kind of circled back around and stayed more in the Christian world. But you'll see these artists trying to navigate this. And let me tell you, the issue is at the beginning, how you identified yourself. So I say all of that. All right, I'm already 52 minutes in it, but that's okay. This gets us to where, because I don't have a lot to say here, because I think I've said everything I need to say to help you understand the Lecrae album. Here comes Lecrae. Let me give you an example. Let's go to Lecrae's albums. All right, we'll go back to the first Lecrae album. All right, we'll go all the way back to the first Lecrae album, 2005. All right, 2005. The album begins this way with a song called Sold Out, right? Here we go. I'm trying to pause it so I can read the lyrics to you. All right. Sold Out by Lecrae. Here's how the album begins. Man, I consider my life nothing. If I could just finish the race and complete the job the Lord Jesus gave me. I live to tell the message. I live to tell the world his message. Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed. I ain't ashamed. We sold out, seeking God's face till we fold out. We want it. We got it. We ain't trying to hold out. Break me, shake me, mold me. I'd rather die like Christ than to live unholy. 116, a band of misfits who get sick at the state of the world. so we hit strips and spit. Christ Jesus, who scooped us out of dirt and cleaned us. We were slave to sinful ways, but Christ freed us. Believe us because of the Bible that supersedes us, not to the intellect thesis. They say we believe in a foolish faith because kids can grasp it, and salvation is granted to those who ask it. But even if you don't know systematic theology or eschatology, you know Jesus is who you want to seek. And you can go on and on. I mean, how explicit can you be in it? I mean, that's just straight in your faith, right? It's in your faith. It's in your face. It's right in your face with his faith. It's right there with Christianity. There's no question what the album is about. It's no question what he's going to sing about. All right. Let's just go to the next song. We Don't. All right. I'm not the standard at all and wouldn't claim to be. But since Christ snatched me up, there's been a lot of change in me. I got my worldview corrected. I see things eternal. Yeah, I've got a whole new perspective. I don't use drugs or sell. I keep accountability because my flesh, it loves to fail. I don't go where I used to go. I got my number changed twice for the girls that I used to know. I don't trip when I pass the cops because I'm not making assist, trying to pass the rock. I don't live life scared of death because when I take my last breath, the next step is there in text. I'm not a legalist and I ain't hating, but there's things I don't and won't do. Yeah, I read Galatians and I keep reading Ephesians if it's Christ we believe in. I mean, you can't get that. I mean, you can't get more explicit than that. And the same thing, you would see the same thing that's in Real Talk after the music stops. Rebel. All of those albums are right there, explicit. Then we could get into Rehab, same way. We could get into Gravity, same way. You could probably say the same thing is happening in Church Clothes. Then Anomaly comes in 2014. And when you get to Anomaly, especially when you get to Let the Trap say amen in 2018, somewhere starting with around probably 2014 through 2019. There was a lot of discussion and a lot of people starting to question, I think even before, maybe just a little before that, Lecrae, there was this feeling that he had kind of moved away from this very explicit proclamation of Christianity, this very explicit proclamation of biblical truth. And as a result, people started saying, I'm not going to listen to him. I got tired of listening to him. I was done listening to him and they always name the album. After that album, I was done. They typically, he became too involved in social justice. He started focusing on a social gospel. And again, why? Because you can't evolve. You can't change. No. We want you to sing what we want. And here's the thing in Christianity. With Christian musicians, you've got to sing what we want. You got to sing about it how we want, and you've got to give it to us according to our theological tradition. And if you don't, we're done with you. We're finished. You're done. And so you end up in this weird world that you can't really explore as a musician. There's no room for creativity. There's no room for creativity in your songwriting. There's no room for exploring and thinking different things. Or if your worldview changes, no. Your worldview has to stay their worldview. Your worldview alters, you're done. Because we view Christian musicians as, here's the identity crisis, not as musicians, but as pastors, as teachers, as ministers, and we're going to hold them to that theological standard. And if they deviate, we're not going to support them and we're not going to listen to them. This is why Christian music has been and will always be second-rate hacks, because it's not about creativity and creating and allowing art to develop and allowing songwriters to develop and allowing these artists to be real about what's on their mind. No. Here's the template. Here's what you sing. Here's how you sing it. Here's the theological line you must walk. You cross it, we're done with you. That's the way it works. And on one hand, you can understand that, right? Listen, on one hand, I understand it. As a Christian, if I'm going to listen to Christian music, I want to listen to Christian music, right? I definitely don't want to listen to things that are theologically messed up. What's the point, right? So I understand that. But you see what it does. So this creates the situation. Why even have a contemporary Christian music industry? Just have someone put out an album. It's going to either be about God or it's not going to be about God. But no, you got to have the contemporary Christian music industry to promote that music to Christians on Christian publications, Christian websites, Christian radio programs, and they got to play in churches and play at youth groups, and they've got to use that, all of that method in order to get their music out there, which then gets them viewed as ministers, which creates the problem. And then Christians won't allow for deviation. This is how it works. This is funny. Early on, Christians, Lecrae is one of the best rappers in the world. These albums are better than any of that secular rap garbage. This album is great. And then the minute he deviates, the minute he kind of goes from this bold proclamation of Christianity and to kind of some will call it a social gospel, social issues, but he doesn't really maybe view it from the same biblical way that he would have viewed it before. Boom. All of a sudden, one of the best rappers of all time, he stinks. He's garbage. He sucks. Don't like him. What happened? I thought he was one of the best. You turned on him really quick. Yeah, he turned. And they always say he started talking about that social gospel stuff. Now I can understand it. Listen, I understand it. If you're wanting a theological treatise, you want a theological thesis, you want a theological exposition of doctrine and the Bible, and then he all of a sudden deviates from that, then you're going to feel what happened, what changed, and you're not going to feel the same way you did about those early albums. Now, again, whose fault is it? Well, Lecrae definitely went after the Christian music world, like, hey, we're here to present Christ. We're here to get people saved. We're here to evangelize. We're here to disciple. We're about ministry. And when that began to change, you're kind of like, well, what happened? This is the never-ending cycle within the Christian music world. Now, in some ways, the cycle's kind of broken now because I think the Christian music industry is just beyond broken right now. I don't even know if there's much of an industry left right now. I don't even know. I mean, like, it's just, yeah. Now, I think there's room for them to forget the Christian music world, just become an indie artist, put out an album, on an indie label, or just self-publish your own album. Don't even worry about a record label and just sing about whatever you want. And then if you want that church thing, then you got to, I don't know, you got to get back into that church circuit and that church concert circuit. But guess what? If you get in that, you're going to have expectations on you. So this world. Now, all of that brings us to Lecrae and his brand new album. All right. Now, here is the thing, and you need to note this. Lecrae in October is going to be releasing an album. He's going to be releasing a book, I should say. All right, he released the album today, Restoration by Lecrae. But he's going to be releasing a book in October. And guess what the book is called? I Am Restored, How I Lost My Religion, but Found My Faith. I am restored, how I lost my religion, but found my faith. In the album Restoration, it's all about Lecrae talking about being restored. And what's weird about it, and this is one of the weird things about the Christian music world, especially in the Christian rap world. This is the way it starts. Your first 2 or 3 Christian rap albums, I don't rap for the money. I don't rap for the fame. I rap for Jesus and his precious name. It's all, it's like it's a template. Every early Christian rap album by a Christian rap artist is going to tell you, I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not doing it for the fame. I'm not doing it for any of that. I'm not doing it for the checks. I'm not doing it for that. But hey, buy my album, attend my concert. Here's how much it is to get in. Hey, share my stuff all over social media. But I'm not doing it for the fame and I'm not doing it for the money. But please buy my record. Please download my record. Please buy my CD. Okay. I always find it this weird dichotomy. Like, I'm not doing it for this. I'm doing it to preach Jesus. So you buy my album, buy an extra copy and give it to that lost friend. All because it's about evangelism. It's not about money. So it's like, if I hear that line one more time in a Christian rap album, I could just drive a car into a side of a truck because it just gets so tiring. It's the same old thing. I don't do it for the money. I don't do it for the money. I don't do it for the money. And then when you get to album 5 or album 6, oh man, fame got me. Money got me. Money became an idol. Money distracted me. Money messed up my life. Well, where did the money come from? I thought you weren't doing it for the money. I thought you weren't doing it for the fame. I thought you were doing it for Jesus and his precious name. What happened? Okay, well, the next thing you know, they're complaining about how money got in the way, fame got in the way, and it destroyed their life. And you're kind of like, wait, what happened? Well, you see a little bit of that in Lecrae. The new album, Restoration, it's like, money got in the way. Fame got in the way. His marriage had problems in his marriage. He talks about being restored, and he's trying to be restored back to his faith. He talked about how people turn their back on him. Now, here's the thing. In the Restoration album, what's frustrating about it is Lecrae never really gets explicit enough. Like in my case, if this is I'm being restored, so I'm acknowledging that I was broken. Well, then give me explicit ways in which you were broken. Make it relatable. Tell me how you were broken. What went wrong? Because he seems to be dealing a little bit with his frustration. And the book in October seems to explain, I lost my religion but found my faith, that he grew tired of many of the aspects in the Christian world. He got sick of it. I know he became very frustrated when he started focusing on social and racial issues. There was a backlash and a lot of from many evangelicals, and it depressed him. He became depressed, he became discouraged, and he became frustrated because of the backlash. But again, why did the backlash happen? Because of the problems in the Christian music industry that creates this weird system that you have to try to figure out how to navigate. Lecrae, I don't know what happened. I don't know, was it just discouragement? Was it just depression? Did he start struggling with his faith? Maybe he started having questions about his faith. I just feel that the new album, he could be, if he really wanted to do a service for everyone, be more explicit. Lay it out. I mean, in your previous work, you were bold and blunt. I just feel this in many cases is so vague. Basically, here's how I can sum up the new album. Lecrae is seeking or undergoing a process of restoration. And he's being restored because he was broken. Now, at times he talks about people turning their back, but he doesn't really get explicit enough exactly how that happened. He talks about, being broken, it sounds depressed, discouraged. He talks about some things that, going through things that happened in his childhood that I guess still are impacting him. But it just seems like the album just never really gets us to where we want to go. Where I want to go is tell me exactly what happened. And then what do you mean by restored in what way? Is he just now restored to a general faith in God, a general faith in Jesus? Has he been restored back to a biblical did he abandon a biblical understanding for social issues? Like what I feel like the album raises, okay, he's being restored. Okay, restoration, great. All right, now if I'm going to hear that you're restored, I need to see, okay, what happened? How are you broken? What broke you? And how are you restored now? Just back to God is good, God is great, and I'm going to follow him, and just very generic. I feel like there's something missing. Now, to be fair, I have not listened to the album in the typical 10 times that I typically listen to it. But what happened is as soon as I started listening to it, all of these thoughts just started flooding in about this weird system. And I feel bad for Lecrae, and I feel bad for any musical artist, Christian music artist who find themselves in this weird world. I was reading comments about the album on some Christian sites, and they were like, 2.5. This album's garbage. This album's trash. And it's like, oh my goodness. You talk about how Christians can turn on you. He used to be considered the best rapper ever. He's great. He's better than any secular rapper who's ever existed. And you're kind of like, okay, sure he is. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, whatever. Okay. But again, that's because his message, I like his message. He's the greatest. I don't like his message. He's complete crap. He's garbage. So, and what many Christians want is a message, not music. They don't want they're not worried about musical advancement. They're not worried about creativity. They're not about taking a genre in a new direction. And there's nothing in this album that really, to me, takes music in a new direction. I mean, you don't expect that on a Christian album. I just feel that that this album really can only be understood by understanding the way the Christian music world works. The reason this album came about is because he found himself experiencing the very problems the whole Christian music industry creates. This album is a product of the very industry that is broken because of what the problems I outlined for you. All right. I'll summarize them one more time. I knew this was going to go longer than I wanted to, but I wanted to try to throw all of this out there. Identity crisis. So who are you, Lecrae? Are you the preacher? Are you the minister? 116? Ephesians? Johnny Mac, a study Bible in your backpack. I'm just referencing, lines from Lecrae songs. Are you there? You're not ashamed. Christ Jesus all the way. That you're not rapping for anything else but Jesus. You're not worried about the glory. You're not worried about the fame. You're worried about praising Him. Is that the Lecrae? Ministry, Jesus. Or Lecrae, you just want to be a musician. Just be a rapper. Sometimes you're going to sing about Jesus. Sometimes you're going to talk about things happening in the world, and you may not even bring Jesus into it. Which is it? Your methods. Well, every time I've seen Lecrae, every single time, maybe just once. Every time I've seen Lecrae, I think it's been in a church. One time, I don't think it was in a church. So every other time, only one time not in a church. But even then, at those concerts, it was clearly buses of youth groups pulling up. It was definitely focused at the church and church people and church kids and church youth groups. It was definitely focused because that was the audience. All right. And then the evolution. I hate that you evolved, that you started questioning, doubting, and you wanted to express some of that in music. You started being upset about racial issues, and maybe you didn't want to address it from what, quote unquote, what a biblical worldview wanted to be. And then everyone turned on you. I hate that you're not allowed to evolve. You're not allowed to change your perspective because the Christian world won't let you. You got to do it their way. You got to basically send out a memo to Christians. Hey, Christians, I'm writing a new album. Will you please review my lyrics and see if they're acceptable? Because if they're not, and here's the weird thing: in the new album, talk about an evolution. And the new album, let me see if I can find it. Restoration. Is it Wheels Up? Let me look here. The new album. Let me see here. Let me look here. I'm looking for it. And I don't know if he does it here. Now, this album does mention God a number of times. Nothing like his early stuff. Yeah. Here we go. And I'm just going to say the word. I'm going to say the word. So if you're going to get offended, I apologize, but I'm just going to say, because this is on a Christian album, right? It's Lecrae. I'm out of stock. DAMN. Damn. I'm out of stock. Damn. Now, what? So Lecrae, what? Now, some will say, well, who cares if he uses a word like that? Is he using it the right way? Is he using it the wrong way? Well, what is he? Again, this comes to the identity crisis. Or the early Lecrae wouldn't have been using that. Now, I don't know if he has any other questionable lyrics. There's no song with an explicit. But here's the thing: this is the weird world. Like, he's evolving. He may want to use that word. Can he or can't he? Well, again, do you want to be a musician or do you want to be a Christian minister? Do you want to be a Christian rapper? What do you want to be? And this is what creates the problem. I don't know what to make of restoration. He's being restored, but I don't really know. The album doesn't give me, I like restoration. That sounds good. One Christian told me, I thought this was about the country, about restoring America, a restoration of the country, and that this was going to be focused on social issues. No, it's really about a spiritual restoration that Lecrae is undergoing, which is a great theme to explore. But I need some specifics. What happened? What broke you? What went wrong? How did you end up off track? And when you say back on track, you're going to be restored back to the Lecrae from Real Talk, the music stops, Rebel? Are you being restored? Well, the fact that his book is How I Lost My Religion and Regained My Faith, or Found My Faith. Well, wait a minute. So you're saying that before that was religion and now you have found faith? Is he getting ready to kind of try to redescribe what being a Christian is versus how he described what a Christian was back in his early albums? Like, where is this going? I don't know, but it just demonstrates the weird world the Christian music industry is in. And listen, and I'll end with this. Anyone who's been a Christian for any length of time, and you, especially if you were young and you listened to a lot of Christian music, you understood how you approached it. I mean, man, when I was an early Christian, this is the way I kind of understood it. Christian music is on my team. Secular music is on the opposite team. So come on, secular artists, go in, go hard. You know, you're going to do better than those secular artists. You're going to make better music than those secular artists. Your music is better. Your music, and it was almost like a competition. And then later on, I started realizing all of these Christian artists, they're listening to the secular artist. They name the secular artist as their influence. They're listening to the Beatles. They're listening to Zeppelin. They're listening to Rolling Stones. They're listening to Van Halen. They're listening to Black Sabbath. And I'm like, wait a minute. I thought those were the bad guys that we didn't like. Wait. And then you kind of realize, wait a minute. It's not really the way it's kind of sold to us. You know, you go to the Christian bookstore. Here's the music you need. That other music will hurt you spiritually. Well, the church is telling you that secular music will hurt you spiritually. You find out that your favorite Christian artist are actually being influenced by the music that supposedly is going to hurt us. Well, why are they being influenced? Because they're finding out what's popular in the secular world, copying it, giving us a Christianized version of it, which again is not creativity and not the way music should be done. You don't copy, you just make music. Maybe that influence will be there, but you're not trying to copy it. You're just being influenced by it and then moving music into a new direction. So we could get into all of that, but Lecrae is the product of all of these problems. He is an example. This new album is a product of all of these problems. All of these problems I've outlined, when you listen to the album, you'll that's what I'm saying. I'm like, the reason he's upset is because of the problems that this started. But why did these problems start? Well, they started with the way the identity you gave us. They started because of the methods you used. You can't identify in one way, use the methods of the church, then evolve, and then get upset when the church is like, well, then peace out, we'll go find someone else. You can't get mad then. You can't feel like you were abandoned. As it would be like a preacher coming and saying, I'm a preacher, and then, you know what? I'm going to stop preaching, and I'm no longer going to preach the Bible. I'm just going to talk about politics. I'm going to do some stand-up comedy routine. I'm not going to preach anymore. Well, that's not acceptable. Well, sadly, that's how many Christian musicians, you get identified that way because that's the way you identified. That's the methods you use. Then you evolved, and then the expectations of the Christians around you, they end up getting very frustrated. All right, I'm going to have to stop there. 1 hour and 17 minutes. And I know you may think, wow, I wanted you to dig more into the album by Lecrae. No. No, you don't want me to. I've set it up for you. And now you can listen to it and you'll hear all of those issues. You'll see how the album came about because of all of those issues. You don't get the Restoration album by Lecrae. You don't find him in that state of mind and finding him dealing with all of those problems with all of the issues that are inherent in the Christian music world. The problems inherent in the Christian music world. And they have been there. And I don't even know the state of the Christian music world anymore. I don't. I have a love-hate relationship with Christian music. I have a love-hate relationship. I could do multiple podcasts on it. I've got a friend in Nebraska. Me and him could probably do 10 podcasts. We could probably do a whole series of podcast episodes on our love-hate relationship with it. Him and I, we have some different perspectives on this, but him and I would tell you how much we got into it. We wanted to love it. We wanted a music that would speak to us. I had since he was raised in a Christian home and not only could listen to Christian music, he didn't have the musical context that I had, because for me, there was always this like, oh, I love this, but there was always this struggle going, but come on, man. You know, I name the secular artists, they do it better than you. That's a cheap imitation. Okay, hey, Petra, you borrowed the Eagles guitar solo there. They do it better. Okay, whatever, I can give you all kinds of examples. But we both wanted it to work. We wanted it to work, but the more you look behind the curtain, you would find these Christian artists don't even know if they attended church, don't even know if they went to church. And then you would find out later on that they didn't even really want to be doing all the Jesus stuff. They just wanted to be a rock band, but they got caught up in that. And then then later on you hear them talking about how they resented it and how they hated it. Or you find out that they were Jesus this, but really they didn't even know if they believed it, and they had their own doubts and they couldn't express it in the lyrics. Like you the more you look behind the curtain, you're more like, what is this? Is this the Christian music industry, or what is this? And then you get into, okay, well, if it's Christian music, then I got to look at it I got to judge it theologically. Well, now what do I do? What do I do? Right? Here's music that comes from the charismatic world. I think charismatic theology is a cancer and needs to be eradicated from Christianity. I don't want to hear Christian music that comes from a charismatic perspective. I don't. But guess what I do when I act that way? I'm hurting Christian music from being able to evolve and express itself. So like, how does that work? How does that work? And again, we can go back to Idle King, their first album, Idle King. They basically denied the doctrine of the Trinity. Then I think their second album, or third album by Idle King, they acknowledged that they denied the Trinity, and then they accepted the Trinity. And I think they got rid of one of their members who didn't believe in the Trinity. Sometimes you'll see the theological disputes happen in the lyrics. Now, I like that openness and that transparency, and I like that. But again, how do you handle that? How do you judge that? There's praise and worship music put out by, in my opinion, people who come from a whacked out charismatic theological perspective. Do I listen to it? Do I reject it? Christian music world is weird. There's so many factors that come into play, and it creates these kinds of problems. We don't get the new Lecrae album where he's talking about being restored and all the things he went through without him going through all of the issues that are common to the Christian music world, and they're common because the Christian music industry is broken. I don't know what it is. Is it a music industry or is it ministry? Well, they sure want to act like ministers when they come into that church. They sure want to talk Jesus when they're on that Christian radio station. They sure want the Christian support and the Christian money. They got no problem taking a love offering in the middle of a concert to say that they're going to use it for ministry and that they're going to reach, young people in the inner city. They got no problem talking that big game up. But then at the same time, they'll whine and complain that they're held to some Christian standard and they get sick of it. Well, you got to figure out who you are, because I don't know who you are, but I know what Christians expect. Or you can just be a musician and go put out secular albums. You could do that. You could, right? Yeah, and I can already hear my friend in Nebraska going, but if they try to put out a Christian album on a secular label, they're never going to get anywhere. I understand that you may be right. I think if it's good enough, it can still gain attention and gain momentum. Remember, it was secular labels who put out the early Christian albums. The early Christian albums were put out by secular record companies. They were put out that way. So maybe not. Maybe it will, maybe it will not. But here's the thing. If you're not doing it for the money and you're not doing it for the fame, then guess what? You put out your album on an independent label and you just put it out there and see what happens. Now, you may not be famous. You may not make all that money, but I thought you weren't doing it for the money or the fame anyway. So, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to be? I'm just a Christian who makes music. Then just make music and don't emphasize the Christian part. Just glorify God and putting out good art, good creative art that sings about the human experience, emotions, relationships. A Christian worldview may kind of shape your perspective, but you're not there trying to preach a sermon. If it's good enough, it's creative enough, it can survive in the secular world because you're not preaching a sermon. You're like, but sometimes I want to preach a sermon. Well, that's the problem. You're going to have to choose which one you want because there's not a lot of leeway there. And trust me, There's not a lot of leeway from both sides. You can argue, well, the secular world won't accept it, and the church world won't accept it the second they deviate from what you think. Some of the very people say, hey, Christian music will never make it in the secular world, and guess what happens to Christian music in the church world when they don't sing the way you want them to sing or sing about it the way you say? You stop listening to them. So you're part of the problem, okay? You do the same thing. So, yeah, I think you just got to put music out there and just see what happens. So there you have it. There's lecrae-resroration, a little bit of history of Christian rap, a little bit of understanding of why it's there. I covered a lot of issues. Feel free to let me know what you think by emailing me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. I bet you everyone listening has different experiences with Christian music, different reactions to it, whether they like it, hate it, what they think about it. Maybe they were confused by why it even exists. Whatever your thoughts, let me know. I may have to do a follow-up to all of this. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great day. And, well, God bless. Get out there and enjoy life because it's way, 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 way too short.